is that we are experiencing currently our fourth modernity. So I guess I should define what modernity is. It's a period of time where we have enormous intellectual advancement, philosophy, science, mathematics, and at the same time, there's a developed enough economy that it's also a period with enormous convenience. So by that definition, there's actually 3.5 modernities in human history, and I don't know enough human history to say that's the limit. That's just the minimum, right? Because there's probably something out there that I really need to learn about before I can give you a maximum limit. The first one was about 3,500 years ago in Egypt. And it's the 18th dynasty in Egypt. So in the 18th dynasty, first of all, imagine ancient Egyptian technology, the ability to build, for example, human-made mountains of granite, with granite interior skeletons, and then a limestone exterior that are designed to be earthquake-proof, that then survive 4,700 years of earthquakes and have not moved internally, that are so accurately built that they're off of being a perfect compass by something like 6 minutes, and there's 60 minutes in a degree. So 1/60th of 360, that's how close it is to being perfect, except that we now think when they were built, they were perfect. And so now astronomers used the fact that the pyramids aren't perfect anymore to measure the rate at which our pole is shifting. If you want to test this, open up Google Earth or Google Maps and then zoom in on the Giza pyramids and then watch what happens. The edge of the pyramid will line up with your screen because they're a perfect compass, which is, when you think about it, unimaginable and unbelievable. So, here's this civilization that's no longer building pyramids by 3,500 years ago. They had abandoned it. The Great Pyramid was already 1,200 years old. But they had a culture and an economy where you would give people a list of food, and then they would go grocery shop for you and bring it to your house. You could actually make a bag and have your laundry in it, and people would come and they would take and do your laundry. In other words, it had both the technology aspect, but also the convenience part. But maybe that's a proto-modernity. Maybe it's not a full-fledged modernity yet. So hence, I'm saying we're on our third because I'm not counting that one. The first one already had its roots well established by about 600 BC, but its breakout moment is in the 3rd century BC. And it happens in Alexandria, Egypt. The Ptolemies, Ptolemy the First and then Ptolemy the Second, found an institution that we call the Great Library. So the Great Library was in fact a library. It had a library in it, but it was more than a library. What it was is the world's first ever university. So a college covers a subject. So the ancient Egyptians built the first ever college. It was a medical academy. The Great Library was a university because it didn't cover a subject, it covered all subjects, the universe worth of subjects, hence the fact that it was a university. It included the first place ever called a museum. At the museum, so today, when you go to a museum, you expect to see ancient history, artifacts, maybe art. When they built the museum in Alexandria, the goal was almost the exact opposite. What you were supposed to do is if you had a technological innovation, you would bring a copy of it and you'd put it in the museum, and then anybody who wanted to could come examine that and use that technology because it was a society that didn't have a concept of copyright. The idea was you would take that technology and then use it and hopefully innovate and improve upon it and then bring the improvement to the museum. The museum was a place to share information, just like the Great Library was. They had classrooms with professors, they had directors. The institution lasted 680 years. At the Great Library, right around 2,000 years ago, they had already done geometry, formalized it. Obviously, geometry existed before, but it wasn't formalized. They invented a steam engine. They actually attached it to a rocket, and it spun in circles. It didn't go anywhere, but that also meant they invented a rocket. That was the first ever rocket and the first ever steam-powered anything. Heron was the inventor. They actually hooked that steam power to a series of cogs and gears, and they had the cars and gears that would move sheets of painted wood, and then they had it in a structure, and as it moved, it could change scenes, so you could have like a ship sailing on waves and dolphins. In other words, they had built kind of a mechanical, steam-powered play. It was, in a way, the first ever TV, 2,000 years ago. We think they may have reached 1 million books by their height. I've seen bigger numbers. I'm always nervous about the big number and the small numbers. Like when you go in the store, there's 3 products. One is really cheap, one is middle priced, and one is really expensive. Buy the middle priced one. The cheap one will fall apart. The expensive one, you didn't need it. It's the middle one, right? So, 1 million books. The United States Library of Congress reached 1 million books in 1905. In other words, in terms of quantity of information, they were right about where we were 119 years ago. But not quality, because 119 years ago we already had flight, internal combustion engines, steam engines, we already had electricity. But when you think about it, they had steam engines. So the potential to get to where we were 119 years ago was there. In fact, the astronomer Carl Sagan says, had we not burnt down the Great Library, or by burning down the Great Library, because obviously we're going to burn it, because we're humans, by burning the Great Library, we lost 500 years of technological advancement. So a way to think about that is, instead of us landing on the moon in 1969, we would have landed on the moon in 1469. Right? Let that sit for a moment. Every time I say it, it's so weird, because right, Columbus is 1492. To think that that's what we lost is mind-boggling. So, of course, I've kind of already ruined part of the story by telling you that we're going to burn it, but it does get burnt. It gets burned by political reasons by the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire cynically used the burning of the Great Library to do an ethnic cleansing event in the city of Alexandria. The Roman Empire in 391 AD became Christian only. So up until that moment, there was a system of tolerance for other religions. It was sort of like a ew kind of tolerance. It wasn't really an accepting kind of tolerance, but any kind of tolerance is better than none. In 391, Emperor Theodosius I declared the Roman Empire was Christian only, and all non-Christians were no longer welcome in the empire. Which is shocking, because just 60 years earlier, Christianity finally became a legal, official religion. The transition from being an unofficial religion to the only official religion was really fast. Theodosius' edict is then implemented in the city of Alexandria by the archbishop. His name is Theophilus I, and they go on a rampage. So at the time, Alexandria was about a quarter Jewish, and a mob destroys the Jewish quarter, kills a huge portion of that population. Many of them escape, but many are killed. They then go and hunt down the pagans. The city was about a quarter pagan, meaning that they worship the old pantheons. The ancient Egyptian and Greek pantheons had been hybridized. For example, there's the god Serapis. And so the pagans are also being killed, but in the process, they burn the Great Library. Some of those books get saved, but it's only temporary. 24 years later, those books are also destroyed. Everything at the Great Library was totally lost. Fortunately for us, there were copies in other locations. Unfortunately for us, what ends up happening is that other Christian mobs are inspired in the empire to burn books. And the reason is this. The science, philosophy are distracting everybody from religion because it causes you to ask too many questions. So if we just burn all those books and have only the Bible, then we don't have to worry about the uncomfortable questions that we can't answer. That's going to come up again. So they start burning the libraries. In 410 AD, the Academy of Athens is restarted. A group of scholars are trying to replace the Great Library. They're like, okay, let's get books together, let's start classrooms, we'll see what we can do. In 529, just 119 years later, the Academy of Athens is shut down, it's closed. But this time, the scholars don't wait for a mob to show up with torches to set everything on fire, they escape. They escape by ship to Syria, they land in Antioch. I know Antioch's in Turkey today, but historically it's part of Syria. And they cross to roughly where the Iraq-Syria border is today. At the time, it was the Roman-Persian border. And they approach the Persians and they go, we're here to ask for political asylum. We fear we'll be killed. The Persians go, yes, of course, come on in. And they go, wait, our books also need political asylum. And they take the books as well. Fortunately for us, the Persian Emperor Shapur the Great had a jealousy fit in the 3rd century AD. He didn't like that the Romans had the Great Library and that Persia didn't have something equivalent to it. So in the city of Gondishapur, he built his own academy with the goal of getting that kind of level of intellectual development. He brings books from all over Persia, from India, from China. He's trying to get some from the Roman Empire, but because the Persians and Romans aren't exactly friends, it's hard. And then a few emperors later, under Khosrow I, next thing you know, there are these scholars bringing maybe 10,000 books. So maybe 1% of what was in Alexandria. So let me just give you one more hint of what was in Alexandria. So there's a scientist, his name was Eratosthenes. Eratosthenes was bored one day, and he did what a bored person could do. Doesn't have to, obviously, but it might be cool. He went and randomly picked up a book and started reading it, which feels kind of appropriate in a setting like this. And when he was reading it, he noticed that the guy was in Aswan in Egypt on the longest day of the year and happened to have looked into a well. And when he looked into the well, he noticed it didn't cast a shadow. So Eratosthenes goes, wait a minute, if it didn't cast a shadow, I know what the angle the sun had to the earth at that spot on that day. It was a 90-degree angle. There's no other explanation. Well, we already had Euclidean geometry, so all you need is angle, side, angle. And you can figure out the size of the earth. By the way, technically, you could figure out the distance of the sun, too, because it's a triangle. So he waits until the longest day of the year, and then he goes to a well in Alexandria and looks down. He sees a shadow. He measures the angle of the shadow. All he now needs is the distance from Alexandria to Aswan, and he can figure out the size of the earth. Because 2,000 years ago, we already knew it was a sphere, because 2,600 years ago, the Pharaoh Neches II had sent an expedition around Africa, and when they went around Africa, because he had a hypothesis that it was a continent, he wanted to see if he could circumnavigate it. And when they went around, they successfully did it. The ancient Egyptians had actually built the first version of the Suez Canal 4,500 years ago. The French tried to delete that from history so that they can take credit, but it's not. It's very silly. Anyway, so they literally 360'd it because they just came out through the canal and ended up in the Mediterranean. They're like, whoa, the Pharaoh was right. This is so cool. But then they said something else because they're sailors and they navigate by the stars and they need to know where the sun is, right? So one of the things that they noticed is as they were sailing south, the position of the sun kept moving from the southern sky till it was directly overhead, and it eventually ended up in the north. And And that really broke their minds because they had never seen that before. And they noticed that the constellations that they were looking at had also gone away and been replaced by new constellations they had never seen before. But then when they came around the southern tip of South Africa, Cape of Good Hope, and are now going north along the east coast, they noticed that the sun slowly moved back into the southern sky and that their old constellations slowly moved back into view and the new ones disappeared. So when they got back, they said, there's only one possible explanation for that. The Earth is a sphere. In other words, we knew the Earth was a sphere 2,600 years ago, but I was taught, Columbus is the guy who figured it out 500 years ago. We knew the Earth was a sphere 2,100 years before Columbus set sail. Actually, Columbus made a terrible mistake. He thought the Earth was about a quarter of its actual size because he thought China was where the United States is. In other words, had there not been a North and South America, Columbus's trip would have been a tiny little footnote that everybody forgets about because some crazy guy thought the Earth was super small and he thought he only had to cross the distance of the Atlantic, not the Atlantic, North America, and the Pacific. There were no ships on the planet that could have made that trip. They would have died somewhere near California and never been heard from again. Their ships would have sunk to the bottom of the Pacific and been deleted. He was only successful because there was a North America there. He just got lucky. Oh, luck. Luck is a great thing. If you don't have it, go get some. We should set up a store where we sell it. You could make some crazy money selling luck. If only it worked that way. I need a time extender. 24 hours a day isn't enough. We need to do that too. Somebody needs to get on that. Yeah, just see this store. Would you like luck? It'd be really expensive though, you know it would. You're probably better off just working really hard and hoping you get lucky. So when Eratosthenes is looking at his two angles and he just needs that distance, he needs that distance because he knows the Earth is a sphere, right? 2,000 years ago, 500 years before Columbus, 1,500 years before Columbus, he knows the Earth is a sphere. Otherwise, he can't figure out the size of the Earth. Wouldn't make sense. He'd be doing the wrong shape. So he hires a guy to walk to Alexandria and then count his steps. So there's a few things that go through my mind when I hear that. One, they're on a curved surface, so he's going to have to figure out roughly how much curve to pull out, right? But the other one, it's not a straight line, so he has to guess how much wiggle he has to pull out. But also, if you were a child and you saw a guy going 1,600,472, right? You know you'd run up to him and just start randomly screaming numbers at him, hoping you could mess him up. So when the guy comes back and tells him the number of steps, especially Egyptian children, they're extremely naughty. Like it's excessively extreme. Eratosthenes goes, okay, this is what my guess on the error is. And then he plugs it in. He was off by 1%. He knew the size of the Earth for all intents and purposes. He got it right. Later on, another scholar went, oh, wait, you should be able to figure out the distance to the sun using this. They plugged it in, and they went, oh, there's no way. And so they thought there was an error, and they just left it alone. They were right. It was just really mind-boggling distance, and they couldn't comprehend it. That's all those little things. So when those scholars show up in Gondi Shapur, think of all the things that we had lost that we didn't even notice. Because, right, if Eratosthenes hadn't randomly grabbed that book and randomly read that page, he wouldn't have gone, oh, I can figure out the size of the Earth. So, Gondi Shapur, there aren't necessarily massive intellectual developments happening. There's a lot of groundwork being laid, though. And then something amazing happens. A new religion has just been born in the Arabian Peninsula. That religion, of course, is Islam. And it goes on a conquering spree. By the time from 633, when the Khalifa Abu Bakr orders Khalid ibn al-Walid to enter into what is today Kuwait, the first piece of the Persian Empire he entered into, When that order happened in 633 until 711, in that short period of time, the Arabs conquered everything from Spain to Pakistan, including a huge chunk of Central Asia. So in less than 80 years, the Arabs conquered the world's largest ever empire to that date. Obviously, there have been bigger empires since. It was bigger than the Persian Empire because it conquered the entire Persian Empire. It conquered about 60% of the Roman Empire. So it was kind of the Persian-Roman dream. Conquer the other guy. The Arabs did it. And then it conquered a little bit of land in Central Asia that the Persians didn't own. So it was big. But the Arab conquerors were really strange. When the Romans would conquer you, it wasn't a great experience. So since everybody loves Julius Caesar, let's just talk about him a little bit. I feel comfortable doing it because I'm part Italian. So it's like, it's okay when Italians trash Julius Caesar. Oh, and Columbus. So Columbus was a horrid human being, just so we get that out of the way. His name wasn't Julius Caesar, it was Gaius Julius Caesar. The poor guy, like he's why can't anybody say my name? Kaiser. And then you're like, isn't that the German emperor? Yes, because Germans know how to pronounce things. They're Germans. Like these are the little things they obsess over. We need to make sure we get this right? It's those guys. Of course they pronounced it right. So when I'll keep saying Caesar just because it's jarring if I keep saying Kaiser. When Caesar conquered France, there were 3 million people living in Gaul. He killed 1 million. Doesn't that feel like genocide there? Like you kill 1/3 of a population. I feel like that's at least a crime against humanity. Just throwing that out there. He enslaved 1 million and brought them back to Rome and sold them into the slave markets. And then he told the remaining 1 million, welcome to the Roman Republic. Look at changing your pantheon. These are your new gods. And learn Latin. And then, of course, they messed up learning Latin so badly, we have French. Anyway, when the Arabs conquered, they didn't do any of that. There was some conquering, there was some bloodletting in the battlefield, there were occasional enslavement events, but it wasn't this grand-scale genocide, I'm going to kill 1/3 of your population. It was, once the fight is over, the killing stops, you're civilians, we take care of you. In the battlefield, the Arabs were fierce and brutal, and especially Khalid ibn al-Walid, and he was unstoppable. But once the battle ended, no more. It was calm and peace from that moment until the next fight. But there was also another thing that was really unusual about Arab conquerors. They were humble. Usually conquerors enter into a place, I know everything that needs to be known, and then they're done. When the Arabs enter Gondi Shapur and see the academy, the impulse of a conqueror is, I don't know what that is. Things that I don't understand, I destroy. Right? They had the opposite response. They went, we don't know what this is. Teach us. And they began a project that took centuries, but it started to bear fruit about 140 years after Gondi Shapur was conquered. We start to get philosophers like Al-Kindi and Al-Khwarazmi. Al-Khwarazmi is ethnically Persian, just for clarity's sake. I'm calling this out not just because I don't want to erase the Persians, but because I want to point something out that's also fascinating about this period that I'm going to talk about. If you were Christian, you could thrive in this system. So for example, Al-Farabi's teacher was a Christian named Ishaq, right? Maimonides, the Jewish philosopher, thrived in this time period. If you weren't Arab, you were Persian, you could thrive in this time period. It's not about your religion or the language you speak or your ethnicity. It was about, could you figure something out that was worth listening to and jump up there and tell us about it? That's what it was about. So if you had the chops to get into that position, that's how you got there. So anyway, Al-Khwarazmi got super obsessed with Indian mathematics. So I'm going to clarify something for you that is really fascinating to me. So Arabic numerals are one of the things he will bring into his writing and then introduce to the rest of the world. He didn't invent those numerals. If he had, maybe they should have been called Persian numerals. I'm just saying. But they were actually Hindi numerals. The Indians had already invented those numbers. He also didn't invent zero, but there was confusion about the zero the Indians were using because they were placing it to the side. They weren't placing it as another number. He's the guy who went, let's just stick it in like it's another number. But he didn't invent it. He maybe advanced it a little bit. Also, the mathematics he was doing, he wrote everything out in language. He wasn't using symbols. So when he would put multiplication, he would write the word multiplication. Like, this is a very different math than I think we're used to, but he is the guy who creates algebra. He does put algebra together using the math, mostly from India, that he had been building upon. That math that was from India had been brought by the Persians to Gandhi-Shapur. So in other words, the events that had unfolded up until that moment lead directly to Al-Khwarizmi. Also, by the way, writing the world's first ever algorithm. When the Romans tried to say his name, they mispronounced it slightly, and they said algorithm. So every time you say algorithm, you're saying Al-Khwarizmi's name wrong, just like Caesar, I guess. So I guess you just know that in like 500 years, somebody's going to be really badly mispronouncing your name. And I guess that's just how it's going to be. So what will happen now as they're advancing, as they're building this new intellectual movement, is they're going to move everything eventually to Baghdad. Now, let me take that back slightly. They're going to make Baghdad the center, but there are going to be other centers. It's not that there's this idea that everything was in Baghdad. It's not true. There was stuff in Damascus. There was stuff eventually in Cairo. Cairo's later, but it will get there. There's stuff in Esfahan happening. In other words, it's not one location, but Baghdad is the center. The House of Wisdom will itself start to build its own library and develop its own philosophy. Sometime between 750 and 800 AD, the Arabs invent modern agriculture. By modern agriculture, I mean crop rotation, hybridized plants. You want to have plant diversity. Right around the year 1000, Ibn Sina will invent modern medicine. His book, by the way, the Canon of Medicine is going to have its 1000th anniversary next year. I feel like we should mark the moment. I'm a big fan of modern medicine. I think it's a great idea. One of the things he realized was that there wasn't just disease. There were diseases. Up until then, everybody thought there was just disease. And depending on what you ate, the position of the stars, whether or not a black cat walked in front of you, it would change whether you coughed or bled from your eyeballs. And Ibn Sina goes, oh my God, this is ridiculous. Please, there's more to it than this. First of all, there are diseases. And then here's a bunch of cures. He gave us hundreds of cures. And then he said, you know what's better than cure? Prevention. Interrupt the transmission vectors. If you could just not get sick to begin with, that's like 100 times better than any cure. He has a contemporary, Ibn al-Haytham. Ibn al-Haytham was from Basra. He'll end up in Cairo. Cairo is a brand new city. Cairo is only 1,000 years old. In the Middle East, that's really actually an epic joke. He's like, oh, you're only 1,000? So, you know what I mean? Like, I live in Austin, and the building is, 90 years old. They're like, it's a historical building. I'm like, really? It's a hilarious building. I don't know about historical. So, Ibn al-Haytham is the guy who does the Book of Optics. By the way, that 1000th anniversary was 3 years ago. He wrote his book in 1021. Every morning, I wake up and I say thank you, because this has really improved the quality of my life. Like, I'd be walking into doors all the time. He's the guy who stated the scientific method 600 years before Francis Bacon. He stated one of Newton's laws of motion 600 years before Newton. He was doing calculus 600 years before Newton. He stated Kepler's first law of planetary motion 500 years before Kepler. And for the record, they were reading him. They just weren't citing him. I would have had to ding them for plagiarism. We know they were reading him because we know that his books had arrived in Europe, so there's no way they weren't reading him, especially since they were lifting some of his material. He stated, all objects in the universe exert gravity on each other. How do you experience that in your day-to-day life? Like right now, I don't feel myself pulled to this table. How do you observe that? He said light had a finite speed, it traveled in waves. This is 1,003 years ago. That civilization did great and will take us into, they also had the convenience. Fast food restaurants, you could have your laundry done. The Arabs began lighting their streets up using petroleum. They would pump it through pipes, and they would light the streets at night. If you took a satellite back to 1,000 years ago and set it up so that it was always at nighttime and went around the planet, when you got to the Middle East, the cities would have twinkled. Everything else is dark. Something so crazy to think about, right? So, by the time we get to about 1348, I'm picking that year on purpose, if you think about it, Iraq invented agriculture 12,000 years ago. Egypt invented government about 6,500 years ago. The Sumerians started writing about 5,400 years ago. There's the Great Library. There's the House of Wisdom. If we start with Egypt's government 6,500 years ago, for 6,100 of the last years, the Middle East has been at the center of innovation on the planet. The Middle East always had a global superpower, and the Middle East always had some intellectual institution that was churning out innovation after innovation after innovation and transforming our world. The last 400 years haven't been so great. It's been rough. It's been a little bit of a setback. The Ottoman Empire implodes, and there are no institutions that replace the House of Wisdom. The Mongols destroy it in 1258, and they destroy the city. They kill about 800,000 of its million inhabitants. Before that, the Arab population had been dealing with the Crusaders. They had fought for 195 years. Now, in terms of a disruption, because it was so localized, it was just Syria, Palestine, and Egypt. It wasn't like the whole place was, but think of all the disruption for 200 years, million people dead. The Mongols killed about 30 million people, so the Mongol destruction was on a much larger scale. But then comes the bubonic plague. The bubonic plague may have wiped out half of the Middle East population in about 3 or 4 years. Think of what COVID just did to us, and it was less than 1%. Imagine the next time we get an epidemic that's taking out 50%, what that will do to us. It broke the Middle East civilization. But right before it did, timing is everything, because luck plays such a huge role. There's a conversation going on. Ghazali and Ibn Rushd are, of course, part of this. Ghazali writes the book, The Incoherence of the Philosophers. And in his book, he says, why do we keep asking all these questions? Every time we ask a question, we get 3 new questions to replace the first question. We end up with more uncertainty. Our lives are filled with doubt. We need to spend more time focused on religion. At that point, Ibn Rushd writes a book that's The Incoherence of the Incoherent. My favorite book title ever. He goes, what are you talking about? Look what modern medicine has done for the quality of our lives. I'm totally on board. I also would throw in the lens. Ibn al-Haytham didn't invent glasses, a Dutch guy did. But still, if the lens hadn't been invented, the Dutch guy wouldn't have done it. Right? He says, look at all these advancements we have. Why wouldn't we want those things? I'm willing to accept a fair amount of doubt and a lot of uncertainty and end up with a lot more questions than answers if we get all these side benefits from it. And that's the conversation that takes place. But when a population of people are being hammered by war and disease, it's really hard to go, you know what? I really wonder if I can memorize the Pythagorean theorem and apply it on a daily basis in my life. And so I think it was sort of a natural thing, once you throw in the Crusades, the Mongols, and the bubonic plague, that Ghazali was going to win that argument, which is why it's really cool to be here right now. Because I've been traveling UAE for a year and a half now, and it has broken my mind and destroyed my preconceived notions. When I first came here, I was skeptical because I think decadence is silly, and I know everybody sees Dubai as like this glitzy, decadent place, and I'm like, oh God, whatever. But I realized what's really going on here, and I can't believe it. I think right now, what UAE is doing, and some of the states in the region are starting to figure out, oh, we don't want to be left behind, and they're trying to play catch up, is a massive innovation event on the scale that we used to see in the past. In other words, the past, that 6,100 years where the Middle East was at the heart of innovation, that norm, I think you guys are bringing it back. So events like this and everything else that the UAE is doing, I think UAE is number 3 in AI right now. I have a friend who's in AI in Dubai. He's probably lying to me, but even if it's number 4, who cares? It's amazing. That's unbelievable. Robotics, shipping. There's a whole global economy that the UAE is tied into. This is amazing to me because it looks to me like a revolution, an intellectual, a cultural, and economic revolution is taking place that I think is the basis for restoring the old order. Not necessarily replacing Europe and Japan and China, but becoming a global partner in that pursuit. So I'm really excited, which is one of the reasons why when I was asked to come here, I couldn't wait. I can't wait to be even tangentially slightly associated in any way possible with this. This is shocking and remarkable and cool and exciting. And the basis of it is people, right? You can't build a technological society, you can't build a society that innovates if you don't have innovative people. So the energy at the core that's required to make this happen, I don't care how rich you are, if you don't have innovative people, there's no innovation. So the core of this is the people, and to me that's the exciting part because culturally it means you've done something revolutionary and amazing. So I wanted to bring it today because so much of the time we're always talking about the past and lamenting the loss of the past and whatever. It's cool, it would have been great if somebody landed on the moon in 1469, but we're not, that didn't happen. We're here in this planet right now. Let's make this one work. And I think that's happening. Anyway, thank you for having me. I think I've been signaled I have to stop. I'm actually not sure. And so... Do we have time for Q&A or, yeah? A little bit, maybe a question or two? We have time for two.
It's okay. Thank you for this good lecture. And if you don't mind, this is one of our soft power, which we have.
Yeah.
In international media, how can we use this great impact of the Islamic civilization to correct some wrong thoughts about Muslims?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really important question. So it's one of the reasons why I've been doing, obviously, my lectures online on Arab history in particular, but Muslim history in general. When I was a kid in college, I realized that pretty much everything I had been taught up until that moment was wrong. Maybe the math wasn't, but even then, I don't know, I'm still skeptical. And so I had to, my college education was sort of re-educating myself, and I needed a library to do that because it wasn't coming, some of it was coming from professors, right? There were those radical professors who were ready to tell you how it was. So for me, it was a journey of sort of self-exploration that led me to the point where I realized what we really need to do is globally, as a team, set out to unerase the narratives that were erased. This is going to sound crazy, but when the European powers, like the French Empire and the British Empire, began conquering the world, they taught the world a set of lies. So, for example, one of the lies is that the British modernized India. When the British began conquering India, India was 23% of the Earth's GDP. Basically, a quarter of the world's GDP was in India. When the British Empire withdrew, India was 4% of the world's GDP. What the English did was a giant wealth transfer scheme where they literally deindustrialized India and moved that industry to Britain. And in the process, turned the Indian population into a consumer population where they had to buy Indian garments that were made in England, right? And so in the process, the British tried to sell the whole world this idea that they did everything. They invented calculus. They invented gravity, actually. Right? I can't tell you how many times I get a student saying, and then Newton invented gravity. What were people doing before Newton? That would have been horrible, floating around everywhere. Like, we don't even think about the ridiculous things we say, right? Like, it doesn't even occur to the student as they're writing it that this can't be a correct statement. And, like, I was taught that Benjamin Franklin invented glasses. He didn't. He invented bifocals. I'm wearing bifocals now. I'm grateful to Ben Franklin, but we added a piece that wasn't right. Henry Ford invented cars. He didn't. Daimler invented cars. There are these little mistruths in everything. It's like layers of this. And it feels like a huge and massive project, because it is. Because we don't just have to unerase Muslims and then retell the story in a way that's accurate. We have to do this for Native Americans, and we have to do this for India, and we have to do this for Indonesia, and we have to do this for the Philippines and Japan and China and everybody, because everybody has had their history distorted. One of the byproducts of this is we tend to look at whiteness as somehow being superior. So part of it also is the implicit biases we've accepted. It doesn't matter what color you are, right? There's this implicit bias that somehow whiteness is amazing and cool, and it's not. Everybody's the same. Actually, what the United States project is it's a system to prop up mediocre white men and keep them in power instead of allowing a meritocracy to kick in. And there's nothing fascinating about whiteness. What we need to do is we need to recognize that we're in a global community where every culture contributed something, and everybody is generally good. Evil can come from anywhere, good can come from anywhere, and then start working together cooperatively to retell our stories. And this is the time period to do it, because we have YouTube and the internet, and we're connected to each other. We can fix the narratives, the global narratives. But then we gotta somehow put it in the schools, because I think the schools are lagging. I mean, right, sometimes on purpose. Like in Florida, the schools now have to teach that slavery somehow helped black people. It's like, wow, that's remarkable. Like, how did we get here? In other words, there are actually places right now that are going the wrong direction. And so it's a struggle. I think humility and trying is the only thing. I don't know. I don't have an answer.
Okay, thank you very much for the speech. I know that the Muslims fought a lot of big battles through the.
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing you.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sure. So I know that while you are talking about the Islamic civilization getting expanded exponentially during a certain period of time, Muslims fought big battles around the world. One of the major battles in Europe were fought between Abdurrahman Ghafiqi and Charles Martel.
Charles Martel, yeah.
In your point of view, how do you vision the whole modern civilization if the result of that battle was in favor of Muslims, not the French?
Okay, so the battle he's talking about is sometimes called the Battle of Tours, sometimes called the Battle of Poitiers. It was fought in 750 AD. An Arab army crossed the Pyrenees Mountains, invaded France. Technically, the Narbonne region of France already belonged to the Arabs, but their goal was to conquer France. They fought the Battle of Poitiers or Tours. I still don't know which one to call it because there's an argument about it. And the Arabs were defeated. The Arabs decided, why are we doing this? And they pulled back to the Pyrenees Mountains and went on the defensive. There's another event, actually two. Muawiyah the first. So the fifth Khalifa, like right off the bat, had Constantinople in his grasp. It was so bad that the emperor put out an edict. Constantine IV is the emperor in my head, but don't quote me on that. He put out an edict saying that he will give a massive gold reward to anybody who could create an invention that could make it so that they could save Constantinople, because they were done. The Roman Empire was finished. There was a Syrian refugee. So the lesson I learned from here is always let in Syrian refugees. I know, like some people get a little, like the Germans, they were like, 1 million, bring them in, we know what happened historically. I just think whenever that happens, it's an opportunity for you. A Syrian refugee invented a petroleum flamethrower. They mounted it on the Roman ships. The Roman ships came out. The Arab fleet was like, we'll just sink you, because they didn't know about the flamethrower. As the Roman ships arrived, they opened up with the flamethrowers and burnt the Arab fleet, and that's how they saved Constantinople. It falls in 1453 to the Ottomans instead of, was it 676? That's the year in my head. Don't quote me on that. So there are these huge what ifs. I don't actually know, because it's just so weird. Like, what if we didn't burn the Great Library too? That would have been amazing. If they had continued to do the things they were doing, and then maybe the Crusades were avoided, and I don't know, maybe, how do you stop the Mongols? An Arab army did stop the Mongols in 1260 at the Battle of Ain Jalut in Palestine, but by then, right, Persia and Iraq and Syria were already destroyed. So I think any one of these little events, if they had turned slightly this way or slightly that way, obviously history could have been a little bit different. They're fun to run as a thought experiment, but I don't know where they take us. I think I'm being signaled like there's this waving and stuff. I've been trying not to look
Dr.
over
Roy,
here.
I hate to not ask the questions I have, and we have to wrap up for the next session, but I think this is a very good point to stop and get a promise from you to come back again to talk about changing the narratives, because this is what we need to do for the next steps. I would like to invite everybody to join Dr. Roy here in the signing table to sign his very famous book, The Blood Throne of Caria, which he had nicely agreed to sign for the audience. And thank you all very much. Thank you so much, Dr. Roy. We know how tight your schedule was and that you gave us the time, 1.5 days of your busy schedule. Thank you very much. This has been enlightening. Thank you so much.